So it's always good to have with us our guest, Edem Wosornu, the Director of Operations and Advocacy in the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And hopefully we shall shortly have on our screen behind us Gabriela Wyman, the Humanitarian Director for Save the Children Global, who is joining us by VTC, I believe from London. And they'll here to talk to you about the latest mission with the Humanitarian Emergency Directors Group to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Ms. Wosornu.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. So I've just returned indeed from a mission to the Democratic Republic of Congo with operations directors from Save the Children. Gabriela is online with operations directors from IOM, UNHCR, UNICEF, UN Women, and WFP, representing the broader IASC Emergency Directors Group. What we saw and heard in the Democratic Republic of Congo was shocking, heartbreaking, and sobering. We have seen that in the past 18 months, and alone the humanitarian situation in Eastern Congo has deteriorated to an alarming extent. It is frankly the worst situation we have ever seen, with around 8 million people in need of urgent humanitarian assistance in the provinces of North Kivu, South Kivu, and Ituri. 8 million people, that is the entire state of Washington state. In this country, DRC, 26.2 million people, more than 26 million people need food assistance. They are food insecure. 1 in 5 Congolese across the country need some form of humanitarian assistance. One thing that stood out very clearly to all of us is the issue of gender-based violence being perpetrated on a massive and distressing scale. In the first 6 months of 2023 alone, more than 35,000 survivors have sought access to services for gender-based violence across the 3 provinces alone, just the 3 provinces. Given the fact that only a fraction of survivors report gender-based violence, the number is likely to be higher. In displacement camps and sites around Goma in North Kivu, and Bunia and Komanda in Ituri, we met with families who've been displaced for months and in some cases for years. A good number of them forced to move from one displacement site to the next due to violence by armed groups that prevents them from returning home. These are people who've lost everything. And when they go in search of firewood, which is mainly the women and girls, they are at very high risks of rape and some form of gender violence. And we spoke to a few of these survivors. We heard a consistent message everywhere. People in camps require access to food, water, medical treatment, the basics of every dignified human existence. What they really want and consistently demand, every single person we spoke with wants peace and wants to return to their land. They want to return home. During the visit, of course, we had the opportunity to speak to the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs in Kinshasa and the governors of Ituri and North Kivu provinces where we visited. We stressed the need to improve protection of civilians across the board. We also reiterated the responsibility of national authorities to address the escalating cases of gender-based violence and to put in place measures to prevent this horrific sequence of events from happening, including heightening security measures around displacement camps and addressing issues of impunity. Despite these challenges, humanitarian action is making a difference in the Congo. So far, we've been able to respond to assist 1.4 million people. This is a fraction of what the number of people in need. I have 3 asks coming out of this mission. This is what we need to be able to do more. Number 1, protection of civilians, access, security. Number 2, funding. We've only received 1/3 of the amount of funds required to be able to respond at scale and at speed. And number 3, to repeat what the people of Congo have said to us in this mission, they want peace and political processes and solutions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We'll now turn to Gabriela Wyman, Humanitarian Director for Save the Children Global, who I believe is calling in from London. Over to you.
Thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not business as usual in DRC. As Edem was describing, DRC already has one of the highest numbers of displaced people in the world. It already has the highest number of food insecure people in the world. It already has the highest number of grave violations against children in the world. But in 2023, the number of internally displaced people grew by a further 1 million. So no, this is not business as usual. This is an acute crisis on top of an already supersized one. Behind every one of these staggering large numbers are individuals enduring immense levels of suffering. For example, I met this 10-year-old girl in Komanda in Ituri province, and she and her family had to flee when her village was attacked. She used to do very well in school. She used to love school, she told me. But now she's struggling to concentrate. She's still very afraid, traumatized, and absolutely scared that what happened to her can happen again. We are supporting her with psychosocial support, but it's not easy after everything that she has gone through. Vast mineral wealth has fueled war, displacement, and hunger, and it has created absolutely shocking levels of need. Particularly heartbreaking to see was also the impact on the Pygmy community, one of the last hunter-gatherer communities left on Earth. Not only is the outrageous level of violence displacing them, it's destroying their way of life for good. This community has lived in the equatorial jungle for thousands of years, taking from the land only what they need to survive, nothing more. But our hunt for cobalt needed for our rechargeable batteries and diamonds for our engagement rings brought the fighting to their doorstep, killing and displacing them so that we can have what is underneath their feet. We met with them in the displacement sites, struggling to survive, not enough to eat, an environment that's unfamiliar to them, and their children malnourished. Their rights completely trembled, and no accountability. DRC is a country rich in natural resources and human potential, and it's critical to the world's climate change goals and energy transition future. But despite this, many Congolese are left behind. The scale of suffering is well beyond what we as humanitarians can address. There is insufficient funding even for basic life-saving needs. Our colleagues have to make impossible decisions every single day, whether to prioritize water or whether to prioritize shelter or medical support for the constant stream of new displaced people. But instead, we're often finding ourselves having to cut rations. These aren't trade-offs between luxuries. These are trade-offs between what is keeping people alive every single day. And as a result, even in longer-term displacement settings, children remain out of school for years. School is not a luxury for a child. It's life-saving. Without education, they will at best be put to work. But worse, they can be forced to join the fighters, and so the cycle goes on and on and on. Durable solution and development seem well beyond the hopes and dreams of the displaced, despite living on incredibly rich soil. As Edem mentioned, simply put, we need more money. More money to scale up the life-saving humanitarian interventions. But it's not going to be enough. What people really need is peace, and they need their government to step up and help them to return home safely, or else to provide them land so that they can resettle elsewhere and start anew. It is only through the lead responsibility of the Congolese government and the combined support of the diplomatic and the development community, the donors and the humanitarians that we can scale up the emergency response in Eastern DRC to save more lives and alleviate the hardship and the risks faced by those forcibly displaced from their homes due to conflict. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much. I'll now open the floor up to questions. Please indicate to whom you're directing your question when you ask. Edie.
Thank you very much, both of you. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing, my name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. First, Ms. Wosornu, could you clarify a figure? You said that the funding so far is 1/3 of what's needed. What's the amount needed? Secondly, you've said that the government needs to do a lot more to provide security, tackle impunity. What was their reaction, and what is the UN going to do to follow up on that? And thirdly, you called this shocking, heartbreaking, and chilling. You've traveled all over the world. How does the Congo rank in terms of global humanitarian crises? And on that issue, could you please also respond? Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Edith, and good to see you. The first point on funding, we're asking for 2.3 billion US dollars. We have received $764 million so far, and we're grateful to the generosity of our donors for continuing to support the people of Congo. On your second point, thanks indeed. Congo is, the Democratic Republic of Congo is under some sort of emergency. So the governors of Ituri and of North Kivu are military governors who have troops at their disposal. So we spoke to them about ensuring that they continue to ensure that there's no get more troops. That was the question that they asked, but of course it's beyond our mandate. We impressed upon them on the need to secure the population. They said they needed more resources to do that. On your point on accountability, this is, as you know, there's a mission in the Congo, and that they are engaged definitely with the government at that level. In the point about shocking, heartbreaking, of course, Gabriela will come in as well. I was in Congo in 2008. The numbers have increased exponentially, as Gabriela said. The suffering has increased exponentially. And I think the point that Gabriela made about a country so rich in natural resources and the population so poor is what is sobering and heartbreaking. My last point is when every single mother, Esperanza was widowed. She's got 8 children. The first one is in school, and then the rest are not. And she said, I just want to go home. I want peace in my country. I'll defer to Gabriela. Thank you.
Okay.
And just one follow-up. How does what's happening in Congo today compare globally with some of the other major humanitarian crises like Afghanistan, for example?
Gabriela, do you want to come in, or should I answer this question? Should I?
Well, let's turn over
I can
to
give
Ms.
you my
Wyman, and then we
humble,
can turn to you.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, please, over to you.
Over to me?
Yeah.
I can give you my perspective, ma'am. It's always very difficult to compare one crisis with another, right? Because the suffering of one person is the same as the suffering of another person. And these are human beings. But I can give you the answer in terms of scale, which I just did. The largest number of food insecure, the largest number of IDPs. I think last year, I'm not sure about this year, it had the largest number of newly displaced IDPs as well. Sorry, internally displaced people. Largest number of grave violations against children. But what is my biggest takeaway from this mission is people sitting on rocks, sitting on volcano. That's where they're sitting, outside of Goma. They're absolutely sitting on the ashes of the volcano. We are struggling to strike water for them. That's how desperate the situation is in DRC. So is it the worst one? It's one of the worst ones I have seen, and I've been in a few places for sure.
Okay. Anything further to add?
I think Gabriela said it. No human being should suffer at all, and we are seeing a lot. It is the largest of everything, and it's worse. 1 million people displaced in a year. That is a lot of people. I wouldn't have anything else to add to that. Thank you.
Thanks. Margaret?
Hi, thank you, Margaret Bashir with Voice of America. To either of you, both of you, I'm just wondering how much the drawdown of MONUSCO is impacting protection of civilians, what people were telling you on the ground, because I know there is also some animosity towards the mission. So are people happy it's leaving, or are they worried that it's leaving? And who are the main perpetrators? Is it Codeco and ADF, or are you seeing the army participating in some of the gender-based violence? Are you seeing, we had heard M23 was back. What were you being told by the people you met? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I'll start and maybe Gabriela can come in. Thank you so much, Margaret, for this question. Maybe three things. We focused on discussions on prevention. We focused on discussions with the population, with Esperanza, with Monique and their families on what can be done to prevent the situation that we're facing. I did not get into the who did what. It's bad enough that this is happening at scale. So I think and you're right, you know, the armed groups, more than 130 armed groups in addition to those that you mentioned, and it's a proliferation across the board. What we focused on, again, was the need for first prevention, and then secondly, psychosocial support and medical support of women who have been violated. And the stories were absolutely horrific, and I didn't want to get into them, but transactional sex at 20 cents is what is being perpetrated in the camps. And that is, you know, conversations that we're having with their families of victims, or the victims, survivors, I would say, themselves. The drawdown of the mission did not come up with the population that we spoke with, but it certainly was a conversation we're having with the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, and also with the governors at, as I said, a very militarized situation. Two things came up very, very clearly. It is a sequential drawdown, because I think the mandate ends not tomorrow. We have some time. So the country team is really focusing on issues around contingency planning, about what would happen and what gaps need to be filled. The second thing is this protection of civilians mandate of the mission, and the need to ensure that the United Nations country team, as well as the INGOs, step up in issues of child protection, issues of children in armed conflict, and bring the necessary tools and the necessary agencies to fill this gap that will definitely happen. But to the population, again, the message was very clear. We want peace and we want to go home. Thank you, Margaret.
Ms. Wyman, anything to add?
I think the SRSG made it very clear when we were there that we need to prepare, that the country team needs to prepare. Their planning is for a drawdown. And as Edem was mentioning, there are a number of functions that the mission is currently undertaking, particularly around protection of civilians, but also some logistical support functions that we're going to have to start planning for to incorporate within the humanitarian side of the equation. My big worry, of course, is that there's already not enough money for either water or shelter. So, you know, how are we going to incorporate additional functions? And will the funding that is currently with the mission, will that move over as well, or will just the responsibility move over, but not the funding?
Ibtisam?
Thank you. My name is Ibtisam Azim from Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. I have two follow-ups. The first on the issue of psychosocial support for victims, and whether you are able to provide any, given the fact that you are not able to, in some cases or areas, not able to meet the basic needs. And the other issue also on the, you said that you need more access, you know, etc. Could you be more specific and elaborate on that? Thank you.
Thank you. So let me start with access. There are different types of access in the Congo, this country that is so vast with very poor infrastructure. So sometimes we drove on roads that were extremely rough, even in the dry season. So there's everything between physical access, where you can't access the population because it's impossible to reach those places. We used helicopter, which is super expensive, to get to some locations. So there's the physical access. Then there's the access related to insecurity. But through our efforts on negotiations with the armed groups, and we can negotiate with all armed groups except one, the ADF, but every other armed group is it's possible to negotiate with them. And it's also sometimes quite difficult to ensure that we as humanitarians keep a distinct footprint and do not use armed escorts from the military. So access in physical access related to insecurity, and also the population's access to services sometimes because of logistics challenges. On psychosocial support, thank you very much, Ibtisam, for this question. Unfortunately, and we see it in many emergencies, emergency responses, the protection sector cluster is very rarely funded. I think if my memory serves me well, the GBV cluster is 5% funded, and also generally overall protection is about 10% funded. So we do what we can with the little we have, but I cannot, overemphasize and underscore the point that we need more funding to be able to do much more because of the impact, as Gabriela said, on the survivors of these horrific incidents. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Yvonne Murray.
Thank you. Yvonne Murray, RTE News. Question, it's really a follow-up on Edie's question. You responded to say that the military governors told you that they needed more resources. Do you agree? Is that the answer? Is that going to make a difference if they get more resources? And then with regard to the funding, $750 million have been received so far. Could you say where that funding has come from, which member states? And lastly, for Ms. Wyman, you mentioned the point about it being very rich resources, mineral resources wise. Is this something that you discuss with people on the ground? You mentioned, the scramble for diamond rings, for example. Is that something that you discuss with people on the ground? What kind of conversations do you have about the desire in Western countries and other places in the world for these kind of resources, and yet the people on the ground are so impoverished?
Okay. So first over to Ms. Wosornu, and then we'll turn to Ms. Wyman.
Thank you. I'm not a military expert, so I don't know whether the troops, the numbers that the governor gave us was enough or not, but I can comment on what the people we spoke with said. They said, for example, this is specific to Ituri province. Things were a little bit better and they felt a bit secure. So as to whether it's directly related to what the military are doing is a separate point. They said they needed more resources to be able to support, but then resources have been diverted. But I'd like to focus maybe on what the people said, and they were fine in that particular location. On your point about funding, it's the usual top donors. It's the US, it's Germany, it's ECHO, the European Union, also Sweden. So we have the usual top donors for most of these crises. And let's not forget that the US globally is 51% of global humanitarian response comes from this country, the US. We also have funding that comes from the Central Emergency Response Fund, which is a huge funding support for the Congo, because in other contexts, this is the Central Emergency Response Fund that has funding from different member states, large and small. So thank you. I hope I've answered the question.
Thanks. Over to you, Ms. Wyman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The issue on also like the richness of DRC, it's not the first time that this is being raised, right? And I refer you to the speech of the Pope earlier this year, because I think he said it best, and there's no need for me to repeat his words. But it's something that requires attention, right? And it's not just the people on the ground with which this needs to be discussed. This is a discussion that is required with our own member states, with our own governments, with our own population, and with our own private sector, because everybody is involved on that one. My other point on that one would be that the richness of DRC is not only what's underneath the ground. What is so striking is how lush that country is. Green, it's got the rains, it's got arable land, pretty much the entire country is arable. Very, very little is being actually used for agriculture because of insecurity, because of land rights, etc. And there's a huge conversation to be had. It's very clear when you walk around there. I mean, you could buy a piece of land there yourself. You could happily live there. It's beautiful. It has all the potential for it to be a very thriving, developing context. But unfortunately, it is not. So yes, there are conversations that need to be had beyond the humanitarians. These are conversations for the diplomats. These are conversations for the politicians. These are conversations for the economists, the private sector. These are conversations for the government of DRC and ultimately for the peace and the security of the population of the DRC.
Okay, thank you. Stefano Vaccara?
Thank you, Stefano Vaccara, Voce di New York. I just follow up on, again, when you say that you talk to who is responsible there to send the army to protect the civilian, and the answer was that they don't have enough funds. As a person, as an officer of the UN, did you, I understand that you are not a military expert, but did you try to convey, to tell them that there is a responsibility to protect, and if a state fails to protect its own people, then the UN, will have to take an initiative or something? I mean, did you give them this message?
Thanks a lot. I always like to go to the resolution 46-182, which talks about the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of a state, and of course the responsibility of a state to protect. Absolutely, those conversations were had. They were had by the SRSG, the Special Representative of the Secretary General, and the Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General, the Resident Coordinator, Humanitarian Coordinator. Very tough conversations are had with the authorities on an ongoing basis. Ours was just an injection and to reinforce these messages. The issue of protection was very clear, and I think the point about also impunity and stressing that those who violate the basic laws have to be punished. These conversations were had. We also had conversations about, there are statistics on, some of the progress made by deploying troops versus the removing troops from Ituri province to another province to support the war in that particular province. So absolutely, clear conversations about the need for the government at all levels to ensure the safety and security of the population. These are conversations that we have with the government all the time, and I think we don't fly in and just fly out. We hold. It's about having real conversations and truth to power when it comes to protection of civilians and using facts and the evidence base to have those conversations. The reason I talked about not understanding the troop issues was because I don't know whether 8,000 troops is enough or not. So I didn't want to get there, but absolutely. Thanks.
Thanks. And Ms. Wyman, if you have anything to add to that?
No, I'm not a military expert either.
No.
Yeah,
No.
I can confirm that. We've had conversations about, the responsibility to protect and our role being auxiliary, as Edem describes, in relation to 46-182.
Christian Salome?
You talk about the humanitarian situation being the worst that it's been. Obviously, there's been these anti-UN protests recently, and we've seen similar situations in other countries in the Sahel and West Africa where people are frustrated with the UN or Western troops that are there. Did you get any sense of the stability of the government there? Are you worried that this will be the next country to see a coup, and how does the political situation affect the humanitarian situation? Are aid workers seeing any of the hostility that's being directed at peacekeepers?
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Shall I? Thank you very much. I think one big date that is coming is elections in December. And it's all the conversations that were being had at different levels. when there are protests, as we had to divert our trip from Kinshasa, we were supposed to go to Goma, but we went first to Ituri because of the protests that were planned. The protests do disrupt humanitarian action because on that day, international NGOs, national NGOs, as well as the UN cannot move, and people who require and need our assistance on a daily basis are affected because of insecurity. So absolutely a direct link between insecurity and what the people need from us. That said, again, I have to be honest, the conversations in the camps were, we just want to go home. We just want peace. We don't care about the politicians. Everyone we spoke with was focusing on that. But of course, to the average person, peace requires a political solution, which requires security. But we didn't get into that. The mission is the special representative is very mindful of these conversations, and she is having them at the highest levels, inside and outside the country, at different levels with different member states who can influence differently. What we saw, maybe my last point on that, what we saw, the statement by the High Commissioner for Human Rights, or the Human Rights Mission in Congo, following the deaths, the senseless killings of 47 people on the day of the protests, that we called out as the United Nations system, that it is not right for civilians who want to protest against whatever to be killed the way they were. And this is where the mission's mandate really comes into play. But for us as humanitarians, the impact is certainly our inability to deliver assistance on a daily basis, and it did disrupt us. Our mission almost didn't happen to Goma. Thank you.
Ms. Wyman, do you have anything further to say?
Just to back up what Edem was saying, we heard when we ultimately did visit the displacement sites that the ability to pump water and to truck the water to the displacement sites was immediately disrupted as a result of the insecurity. So that means that people don't get water for a day. And knowing that already there is not enough water to go around for the number of people that are there, not having water for a day has immediate, quite dire consequences. So this is just an example.
Thanks. I see no further questions, so I would like once more to thank our guests, Edem Wosornu and Gabriela Wyman. Thanks very much for your briefings. There's no briefing by the President of the General Assembly's spokesperson today, but hopefully there will be one later this week. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks. Thanks, Michael.